When I was younger, I spent 30 days in an adolescent inpatient facility. I had expected it to be like the movies, with strict orderlies and cold, empty halls, but the reality was quieter and heavier. The building itself felt tired, with white walls that had long since lost their brightness and a constant low hum from the fluorescent lights overhead. The air always smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, but underneath that was something else, a stale, human scent that told you too many people had lived too many hard days inside those walls. Most of us there carried our own stories, but there was one person I still remember more than anyone else. Her name was Wendy. Wendy was 13. She had a soft face, the kind you might see on a school yearbook page, but there was always something in her eyes that seemed far older than her age. She was polite, even kind in a quiet way, but she carried herself like someone who had already lived through more than she could say out loud. I noticed her the first day because of her clothes. She always wore the same faded jeans and an oversized sweatshirt that hung loosely on her thin frame. She never changed, not even when we had recreation time or group activities. At first, I thought maybe she did not have any other clothes with her, but then I noticed something else. Wendy smelled. It was not a faint odor that you might expect after a long day. It was sharp and heavy, the kind of smell that told you she had not bathed in a very long time. People in the common room kept their distance, not out of cruelty, but because the smell made it hard to sit close. Still, Wendy seemed not to notice, or maybe she noticed and simply did not care. Over time, I learned that in places like this, smells like that were not uncommon. Some kids avoided bathing simply out of depression or stubbornness. But with Wendy, there was something different. The staff never forced her to shower, even though they had rules about hygiene. They seemed to treat her with a sort of quiet patience, as if they understood something the rest of us did not. One evening, I was sitting at a table in the common area when one of the older girls sat down next to me. She must have seen me glancing toward Wendy because she leaned closer and spoke in a low voice. "You know why she never washes, right?" she asked. I shook my head. The girl sighed and told me what she had heard from one of the nurses. Kids who had been abused for a long time sometimes stopped taking care of themselves. It was not laziness, it was survival. Some would stop bathing completely. Others would wear the same clothes for weeks. In the worst cases, they would even soil themselves on purpose. Anything to make themselves undesirable to the people who had hurt them. Wendy's smell, her clothes, her quiet distance, they were not signs of carelessness. They were her armor. That night, I found myself watching her more closely. She sat on one of the couches, staring at the television without really seeing it. Her sweatshirt sleeves were pulled over her hands, and she kept shifting her legs slightly, as if she was never fully comfortable. She did not laugh when others did, but she smiled politely when someone spoke to her. There was a moment, just before we were all sent back to our rooms, when she looked up and caught my eye. I smiled, and for a brief second, she smiled back. It was small, almost hesitant, but it was real. After that, I made it a point to say goodnight to her every evening. I would walk up, wrap my arms around her, and give her a hug before we all went back to our cells. At first, she seemed surprised by it, but after a few nights, she started to lean into it just a little. She never said much. Sometimes she whispered, "Good night," in return, and sometimes she just gave me that same small, guarded smile. The hugs became our quiet ritual. I did not care about the smell. In a place like that, human connection was rare, and I could tell she needed it. Maybe it reminded her that not everyone would hurt her. I never asked about her past. Some things you do not need to ask to understand. The way she carried herself, the way the staff treated her, and the way she hid inside that same set of clothes told me enough. She had been through something no one her age should ever endure. When my 30 days were up, I packed my things and said my goodbyes. Wendy was in the common room. I gave her one last hug and told her to take care of herself. She smiled, and for the first time, I thought I saw a little warmth in her eyes, like maybe she believed I meant it. I do not know what happened to her after that. I like to think she eventually found a place where she felt safe enough to let down her guard, where she could wear new clothes and feel clean without fear. But part of me knows that some wounds never really go away. I was a teenager when I spent time in the pediatric ward of a hospital. It was not the kind of place where you came in with a broken arm and went home the same day. This was the kind of ward where the rooms were arranged so the nurses could keep eyes on you at all times. Each door had shatterproof wired glass windows, and the bathrooms had no locks. Privacy was not something we were allowed to have. I had been admitted for anorexia. I was not alone in that. Another girl, close to my age, was there for the same reason. We shared the unspoken understanding of people fighting the same quiet war with themselves. Then there was a boy who had been brought in because he was suicidal. His condition was so severe that he could not have any cutlery except for a plastic spoon. His meals were carefully monitored. He had no blankets, only special heavy pajamas that could not be torn into strips. He was never left alone for more than a minute. And then there was the homeless kid. He had been hit by a car while squeegeeing for change at an intersection. His leg was broken badly enough to be in a full cast, but that did not stop him from moving around the ward in his wheelchair like it was an extension of himself. He had a habit of sneaking into places he was not supposed to be. The kitchen, the kids' playroom, even the nurse's station. He collected little treasures from these places, such as juice boxes, packets of crackers, toys, and craft supplies, and stashed them away in his room. He got caught often enough that they eventually put him in one of the psychiatric rooms near the nurse's desk so they could keep an even closer watch on him. We were a strange little group thrown together by chance and circumstance. In time, we became something like a club. Our favourite spot was a small lounge area where the light was softer than in the main halls. The four of us would gather around a table, playing cards and trading whatever small contraband we had managed to sneak past the nurses. The conversations during those card games could swing from absurd to disturbing without warning. One afternoon, I pulled a small piece of cheddar from my pocket and held it up. "Does anyone want this cheese?" I pretended to eat it so the nurse would think I finished my lunch. The homeless kid's eyes lit up. "Mine, dibs. Here, trade you these beads I took from craft time." He slid a little plastic bag across the table like we were conducting some kind of black market deal. The other anorexic girl leaned back in her chair and smirked. "If you can find me some sewing gear, I will get you ice cream and saltines. I have a plan for weigh-in day. I am going to sew some batteries into my hair scrunchie." The suicidal boy did not look up from his cards when he asked, almost casually, "Do you think I would die if I scooped my own eyeball out with a spoon?" The rest of us stared at him for a moment before going back to our game. Conversations like that were not uncommon in the ward. You learned to take them in stride. It was a bizarre time in my life. The outside world felt impossibly far away. We lived on hospital time with meals brought at the same hours each day, group therapy sessions, and constant check-ins from the nurses. The sameness made the days blur together, and our little club became one of the few things that gave the time any shape. The suicidal boy was the first to drift away from us. After a while, he stopped joining our games. He would sit alone in the corner or stay in his room, eyes unfocused. I hoped he would come back to the table, but he never did before I left. When I was released after 3 months, he was still there, but I do not know what became of him. I hope he found a reason to keep going. The other anorexic girl eventually left too. Years later, I would hear that she had found success as an actress. She had been in a sitcom and even a movie. I thought about the way her plan with the batteries had gone wrong. She had sewn them into her scrunchie as planned, but they fell out during weigh-in. The nurses had locked her in her room for a week as punishment. I had not thought about that in years, until I saw her face on a screen. It made me wonder if she remembered those days the way I did. The homeless kid was different. He and I had a kind of quiet understanding. We both liked to find small ways to bend the rules, to carve out moments of control in a place where everything was decided for us. We would sit close together during cards, sharing food and little treasures we had collected. Somewhere in that strange environment, a small romance formed between us. It was not dramatic or loud, just a soft connection in a place that often felt cold. When his time came to leave, he wheeled up to me in the lounge. He pulled a pocket knife from his sleeve and, without saying much, sliced a belt loop from his jeans. He handed it to me and said, "So you remember me?" I kept it. Somehow it felt more valuable than any piece of jewelry or expensive gift I had ever received. I still have it nearly 30 years later. Looking back, the ward feels like a dream. The constant watch of the nurses, the locked bathrooms, the wired glass in the doors, all created an environment where time moved differently. We were teenagers, but we lived inside a strange bubble that had more in common with a survival camp than a hospital. The friendships and connections we made were born out of necessity, but they mattered all the same. Even now, I sometimes think about those card games. The cheese trades, the beads, the ridiculous and sometimes disturbing conversations. I think about the boy who could only have a plastic spoon, the girl with her sewn-in batteries, the homeless kid who stole my heart for a little while. And I think about how, in that ward, with all of us carrying our own broken pieces, we somehow found a way to keep each other company in the quiet hours. I used to work in the dental clinic of a psychiatric hospital. It was not the kind of job I had ever imagined for myself, but at the time, I needed the work, and the position was available. The building was an aging structure, with faded red brick walls and tall windows that seemed to look down on you like tired eyes. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with something older that could never quite be scrubbed away. The clinic was tucked into one corner of the hospital. Each morning, the dentist I worked with and I would receive a list of patients for the day. Some came in with polite smiles, others shuffled in silently, and a few carried an energy that was unpredictable enough to keep you on guard. I had been warned on my first day not to make assumptions about anyone, but I will admit that the first time I met Terry, I broke that rule instantly. Terry arrived one late morning. He was a tall, thin man in his 30s, though his posture made him seem smaller. His skin was pale, and his hair was a soft brown, unevenly trimmed, as if someone had taken scissors to it without much care. What stood out immediately was his clothing. He wore a frilly pink dress that was clearly made for a child. Around his neck hung a piece of twine with small photographs clipped to it, swaying lightly with each step. I noticed the photographs first. They were cut from magazines, showing little girls smiling in sunlit parks or playing with toys. I felt an uneasy chill crawl up my back. The first thought that came to my mind was one I am not proud of. I assumed I was looking at the sort of man people whispered about in warning. When I greeted him, he looked up slowly and smiled. It was a soft smile, the kind that was careful and almost shy. His voice was barely above a whisper when he introduced himself. I took his name and led him to the chair, all the while keeping a quiet watch on him. Every small movement of the string around his neck, drew my eyes back to those pictures. The appointment was uneventful. Terry sat still, spoke only when necessary, and followed every instruction without complaint. When it was over, he gave another small smile, thanked us, and walked out without a fuss. After he left, my curiosity got the better of me. I turned to the dentist and, keeping my voice low, asked about Terry. The dentist looked at me for a long time, as though weighing whether to tell me. Finally, he said, "He is not what you think." I must have looked doubtful, because he set his tools down and leaned back against the counter. Then he told me Terry's story. When Terry was a young boy, he had a little sister. They were close in the way siblings often are, when they have only each other to rely on. But one night, their stepfather came into their room. Terry had been forced to watch as his little sister was assaulted and killed. He had been too small to stop it. He had screamed until his voice broke, but no one came in time. That moment shattered him. In the years that followed, Terry began to take on parts of his sister's identity. The dresses, the hair bows, the photographs of little girls, they were not signs of some hidden evil. They were his way of holding on to her. He wore the clothes she once wore. He carried pictures of girls who reminded him of her. In his mind, those pictures were his friends, the only companions who would never harm him. I felt a heavy knot form in my chest as I listened. Shame settled over me like a weight. I had looked at him and seen only danger, when what I should have seen was a man who had been broken in the worst way. Over the weeks that followed, Terry came in for more routine work. I noticed how quiet he always was, how careful his movements seemed. Sometimes he would hum soft tunes under his breath while in the chair, simple little melodies that sounded like children's songs. He always thanked us before leaving. On a few visits, he told me small, innocent stories about the girls in his pictures. They were not real memories, but in his mind, they might as well have been. They were moments of friendship that he could hold on to when the real world had given him nothing but loss. One day, after his appointment, I walked him to the door. He paused before leaving and looked at me for a long moment. His voice was soft when he said, "You are kind. You do not look at me like the others do." The truth was, at first, I had looked at him exactly like the others, but I had learned something from Terry that I still carry with me. Pain changes people in ways that are not always easy to understand. Sometimes the things that seem strange or unsettling are not born from malice, but from grief that never healed. It has been years since I last saw him, but I still think about him sometimes. I wonder if he is still at the hospital, still wearing those dresses, still carrying those pictures. I wonder how many new people have met him and made the same mistake I did. Terry taught me that the stories we tell ourselves about strangers are not always true. Sometimes the real story is far more tragic than we could imagine, and sometimes the gentlest souls are the ones who have suffered the most. The pediatric ward of the hospital was split into two distinct sides. On one side were the less severe cases, kids who still had a degree of freedom to move around and talk to each other, even if the nurses were always close by. The other side was for the severe cases. The people there were considered dangerous to themselves or others, so their rooms were locked most of the time and they were under constant supervision. I was on the less severe side. Life there was not easy, but it was safer. At least that was what I thought. The two sides were separated by a heavy door in the hallway. I had been told it was always locked and that only staff had the key. I never questioned that. I had seen a few of the patients from the severe side during supervised group sessions. They moved differently. Some had eyes that darted around the room like they were following something no one else could see. Others stared straight ahead, their faces blank. It was late one night when I woke up without knowing why. The lights in the hall outside my room were dim, just enough to cast a faint glow into the doorway. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, and that was when I saw him. A man stood in my doorway. He was much older than anyone else in the ward, easily in his 30s, maybe older. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms that looked strong even under the loose hospital clothing. He was just standing there, his head slightly tilted, staring at me. I froze. He spoke in a voice that trembled with something I could not place. "Are you all right?" My mind scrambled for an answer. I wanted to call for a nurse, but my voice felt caught in my throat. I hesitated, then managed to say, "Yes." The moment I said it, his expression changed. His eyes went wide, his face twisting into pure horror. He shook his head and took a small step back, like he had just confirmed something awful. "I knew it," he said, his voice rising. "You can see them too. Do not let them get you." Before I could respond, before I could even understand what he meant, he let out a scream that made my skin crawl. It was not just fear in that sound. It was the kind of desperation that comes from believing something is already too late. The next few seconds blurred together. 2 security guards rushed into view, grabbing him by the arms. He fought against them, his eyes still locked on me as they dragged him into the hallway. "Do not let them get you," he screamed again, his voice echoing down the corridor until it faded into the distance. I sat there in my bed for a long time after they were gone, the dim light from the hallway still spilling across the floor. I kept glancing toward the doorway, half expecting to see him standing there again. No one came to explain what had happened. In the morning, the staff acted like nothing was unusual. I never saw the man again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the way he looked at me, like he was certain I was in the same kind of danger he believed himself to be in. And I wonder if maybe, in some way I could not understand at the time, he was right.